Hey everybody, Mark Arinsberg here with The Pure Now Show. This is episode number 30. My guest today is James Cross. James is a creative director at BBC Creative in the UK. He's been partnered up with Tim Jones for over 15 years, creating award-winning campaigns, coming up from the bottom all the way to the creative top. Here we go. Hey James.
Hi Mark, how are you?
I am super duper, thanks. How you doing, man?
I'm good. I'm a little tired. It's quite early here, but everything is good.
Yeah, what time is it in merry ye old Manchester?
It's just gone 8 a.m, which, because we're in lockdown, these days is actually quite early for me to actually be up and around.
Oh, so you guys are in lockdown right now?
Well, I say lockdown, I say we're working from home, so you've kind of, over 2 years I've got from this habit of kind of being sort of around at 7 a.m. to sort of maybe getting out of bed more like 8:30 a.m. so I can be sat at my desk for 9, you know. So yeah, wow. It's a different world now for sure.
Well, let me first say thank you for coming on the Pure Now Show. Totally appreciate you spending some time to chat with me and talk about your professional career and everything that's kind of going on with you. And I didn't realize that you guys were still under some restrictive movement there. I was under the assumption that most of the world was kind of freely moving about. So what's
No, we are pretty much free. There's the odd place that has to wear a mask, but COVID doesn't exist in the UK according to the government anymore.
According to the government. But what about according to you? What is going on according to you, James?
Well, I mean, it's a different world in terms of there's a hybrid model in terms of working, so nobody is in the office 5 days a week, for example. At the BBC, we operate a sort of 2+3 model, where it's 2 days in the office, 3 days from home. So it is a very different world, and obviously that brings its own challenges and, you know, benefits too. I think the older you are, the more benefits it has. The younger you are, in terms of, you know, learning from other people, I think there's probably things that my generation took for granted, like, you know, having more senior, more experienced people around to come and, you know, tell you what's what and stuff. So, you know, I think it's harder for the younger generations coming into the industry, but, you know, from my point of view, there are a lot of benefits in terms of your work-life balance. I think a lot of people are finding that's brilliant. There's no, you know, we're not commuting for 2-3 hours a day and things like that. So yeah, I quite like it. But yeah, there's certainly challenges within the industry.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. How has it potentially negatively impacted you professionally, although maybe it's benefited you personally in having this kind of separation of church and state, where you've got this time for yourself and you feel that it's more balanced? How has that affected working for the BBC and delivering work to clients, meeting with clients, working with deadlines, client management? All that has shifted. I mean, it was moving in that direction anyway, but now everything is so solidified in that way. How do you feel that that's affected your work?
I don't know if it's affected the work massively. I mean, we kind of never know in a way. I think we still operate under the same processes. We with the sort of creative department, you know, the way Tim, my co-creative director, and I run our teams. You know, things haven't changed massively in that sense. I suppose what we lack is every meeting we have is formal now. There's no, you know, catching someone in a corridor and then suddenly you hear something, or being inspired or making certain changes have to wait for very scheduled meetings. Whereas I think I always enjoyed, you know, being able to float around a department and, you know, chatting to someone over a coffee, or, like I say, just seeing them at the sort of copying machine and just, you know, you could just say something and you'd hear something. So that's hard. I think the level of distractions are hard. I have ADHD, so it's kind of, being at home can also be a bit of a nightmare in terms of there are a million things to distract me. So I have to really get in the zone in order to sort of work and concentrate. So that, I do find that a challenge. You know, not having not leaving the house. I suppose from a mental health point of view, being at home all the time is great, and then you kind of crave, you know, other environment. So I don't strictly adhere to the 2 days in the office thing. I sometimes might be in 3 or 4, or go and sit in a coffee shop for the day and I work from there. But yeah, so it certainly brings its challenges a bit, but I think there are also positives. I think I'm certainly, I'd say, physically a lot healthier than when we were in the office full time. I think the work we do, like I say, hasn't necessarily been affected, but it certainly influenced it. You are a product of your environment. So I'd say the work that the BBC have done, BBC Creative, we always have to reflect the culture going on around us, and we've done that quite well. So there are certain pieces of work that perhaps in times gone by we may not have been inspired to write, but equally I sometimes wonder if there's stuff we would have done that we haven't done because we are in the situation we're in. We're very much into designing experiences for our shows on the BBC, so we kind of say it's like we don't want to just be preaching to the choir all the time and putting out promotions which appear on our own TV channels and radio stations. So that has certainly been affected by the change in the world. It's, initially when there were restrictions, it was harder to sort of do these things and we had to think cleverly about them. So we don't just want to do billboards, for example. We want to create those billboards as some sort of experience and something that people are going to share, and it's going to have PR value. But obviously that's hard to do when everyone's locked in their houses.
Well, and with the predominance of social media, you've kind of had to shift your focus into leveraging that massive audience. How has that changed the way you think about producing work, the style of work, maybe the length, because of attention span deficit disorder that the world pretty much has at this point? How have you tailored the kind of work that you're doing to present these projects for the BBC so you can get the net results that you're looking for?
Well, I mean, in terms of the general approach, we're no longer, I would say, a TV first agency where everything we used to do was all about the big TV production. There's always a need for that and always a need to do it well, but whatever we do, I think if we're especially making TV, I love nothing more than crafting something to a point where everyone else would have stopped just going a little bit too far, because that's kind of where the magic happens, and people become very interested in what you're doing if your production technique is slavish and way more involved than it probably needs to be. We put massive pressure on ourselves, but it 9 times out of 10 creates magic. And I think in terms of durations of what we make, certainly shorter. We work closely with TikTok and Facebook and YouTube. We regularly have their creative teams consult with us just to tell us what's the best way to approach things. How important is that first 5 seconds if we're making a pre-roll, for example. What kind of attention spans are we dealing with on TikTok, which is super frightening. That's not even 5 seconds, it's less than that. And it's just interesting. It's good to know, it's great as a creative to know your parameters, because I think that focuses your attention and you work within that space. And I always think restrictions on a creative are good things. So it's making way more work that is social first is certainly the biggest difference, and maybe an enforced change that was coming anyway. It certainly happened faster than I think anyone thought it would.
And because of that, I mean, the viewing audience is massive. So your impact actually, even in 4 seconds, may have a far more reaching effect of nabbing an audience than previous TV advertising, just because the massive numbers that you're reaching versus the more narrow field of television advertising. So is there some kind of a balance there where you're actually getting the results that you want because of the increase in numbers, even though your window of of display is shortened? Has there been some kind of an adjustment in that?
I think there certainly has. I mean, I'm always quite skeptical of viewing figures on social. I think, things are recorded. There's no guarantee of someone's attention. But yes, in terms of the viewing figures, which is essentially how we measure everything at the BBC, they have been strong. They've got stronger. I'd like to think the way we now approach advertising and promoting our shows has something to do with that, of course. But yeah, I mean, we still make the longer form work. But yeah, there's certainly the work we've done, I would say, organically is more shareable, and that's probably comes as a result of being, social first.
Right. You're listening to The Pure Now Show, a creative podcast for creatives presented by Balance. Well, let's go backwards a bit. You evidently started in the music business before you did much. And it sounds like you had some fun for a little while, not doing a whole lot, but being in an environment, music. You were obviously super into the music scene.
Yeah, sure.
How did you get there? And were you raised in Manchester? Is that your hometown?
No, my hometown is Northampton, which is in it's kind of halfway between Birmingham and London. So it's a bit of a nowhere town. It's a big town, but there's no reason to go there, really. Everyone leaves kind of place. So it's I was always frustrated growing up. Wanted to live in a city, Manchester especially. Through music, it's got such a rich musical heritage, with bands from Joy Division, New Order, right through to today. It's like a really buzzing scene, and it's always, for a small town boy, it's been massively exciting and still is. I've always loved music. Growing up, I was fascinated by Creation Records and a guy called Alan McGee, who signed bands like Oasis, who were hugely popular. It wasn't necessarily I love the music, but I was always fascinated by the business side of it, and always thought it was super cool that you could, have an office job and wear sunglasses all day if you really wanted to. And I worked there. As a student, I used to go in once a week to Pop Tones, which Creation Records closed down and became Pop Tones, and they were in London. And there, I was just making tea and unpacking bags, and then later realised that I may have been unaware that I was a bit of a drugs mule. I was regularly sent to random addresses in North London to pick up packages which I told were T-shirt samples or record samples. And then bring them back to the office, which was all a bit strange, and I was very naive. And then I worked at a label called Shifty Disco Records, which everyone was generally pretty high all the time. So my office hours were 11 a.m. till 2 p.m. And I think my dad realised that this was no way to be. And I think at one point it was costing me more to go to work than I was actually making in a day. So I decided, having written I used to do lots of press releases for them I've got no training in that. I just confidently took that job on. And that got me a very strange interview with a chap called Mike Johnson, who gave me my first ad agency job. I didn't really know what advertising was, or certainly what the business of advertising entailed at that point. And I left Shifty Disco on a Friday night and started at B&B on Monday morning.
Wow. Shifty should have been the giveaway.
Yeah, it was chaos. But remarkably, they still kind of exist. So,
wow.
Yeah, more power to them. Yeah.
So you went into the field of copywriting, and how did you mature in that? How did you become inspired to continue down that path and become, more in charge of the creative scene?
Yeah, I suppose I started off writing sort of local, what they call dealer ads for Saab, the Swedish car brand. So it's kind of low-level-ish work, and I suppose I learned the trade by becoming very nerdy about it very quickly. So, a party trick of mine was always, every D&AD annual from, say, 1990 to 2005, I could pretty much tell you where certain pieces were, what page they were on, who wrote it. So I studied other people's work. I would read avidly and lift phrases out of books, and I'd learn that way. And obviously Mike Johnson was a real mentor who really was quite strict on me in many ways, and it was really good. The other way I suppose I matured, and within as being a junior, I was made. My business cards always said senior copywriter on them, because I was teamed with an art director who was 20 years older than me, and he didn't want me going into meetings with a business card that said junior copywriter on them. So I had to grow up very quickly. So I suppose I was seen as maybe more experienced than I actually was in those early years. I wore glasses that I didn't really need to make me look slightly older. And, I've always been a believer in kind of fake it till you make it. So kind of it carried me through with, this self-confidence that I was able to sort of bring to the fore we were presenting, and, certainly served us well. But my ambition was always to work in TV, and this was doing, like localized car advertising for, like I say, Saab. We did some for Vauxhall, which is another General Motors brand. And it went well. We were able to do a little bit of TV, and we were just, I suppose, we were just aggressive at the time in terms of, we were the agency that did all the small stuff, and we'd regularly meet with Lowe in London, who were doing all the big sort of brand advertising stuff, and challenge the client that can we have a go at this? Can we do it? And eventually we did break through and change the agency. Really, they were quite lethargic as an agency at the time, who were working on Saab at that brand level. I've always, I suppose it's maybe not being in London all the time. It's you have that desire just to prove yourself, and you kind of always ready to show the world what you can do, because when you're not in London, or you're not in New York or whatever, you kind of have to, I feel, fight for those opportunities. As a junior creative, you're not working on the sexy brands. You're kind of doing the shit that nobody else wants to do. So but where in itself there are opportunities. But so we've always, Tim and I, especially since we've been working together, have taken that very seriously, and that's always got us in the right rooms with the right people. It's all about attitude, which I think success in the creative industries really is.
Well, like you said, you guys are zigging while everybody's zagging. So,
Yeah, we stole that from BBH, but yeah, some people say that.
Yeah.
I love it. But that's the approach. It's kind of studying what everyone else is doing, making sure what you're doing is unique to that sector at the very least. But yeah, always being the sort of the awkward apple that doesn't falls far from the tree.
So how long did it take for you to find Tim and make that beautiful thing happen?
Yeah, that was 2007, so 15 years. So Paul, who I was working with as my art director, my first art director was in his 40s when I was like 22, 23. And he got a job as a creative director, which left me on my own, and I joined an agency called Big, purely because they had an account at the time called WKD, which is like a flavored like vodka drink, where they were able to do some really interesting advertising, and I was always a fan of it. It spoke to my age group. It was funny. It was it was provocative. So I was lucky enough to get a job there. Tim was working with another copywriter at the time, and he effectively cheated on her with me, and we kind of splintered off. But Tim and I have exactly the same backgrounds. We come from the same kind of small town background. Our fathers have very similar life experience. We'd even, going back to music, attended the same shows, unbeknownst to each other that we were both there, but we've been to a lot of similar experiences. So yeah, we got on like a house on fire, and 15 years later, we're still best friends.
That's pretty incredible. I mean, coming across your brother from another mother, and not only just as friends, but as vocational friends, that you share the same passions and desires, and throw that together in the mix and come up with some really incredible work, frankly.
Yeah, it was cool. I mean, you as a creative, you're regularly paired with other people, and I always found it hard to find a groove with people, and especially in the early days. But yeah, Tim and I hit it off pretty quickly. We've got so much in common, but at the same time, I think what really works for us is a skill set, or certainly interests that complement each other. Where my favorite part of the process is the sort of concepting phase at the beginning and developing the idea. Tim, is pretty amazing at implementing. He's happy to sit with, sound engineers and people grading for hours and hours on end, whereas, I can do an hour and fade away pretty quickly. So it all works. It works pretty well. What he's good at, I'm not so good at, and maybe what I'm good at, he's not so interested in or as good at.
And he's got kind of the opposite ADHD thing going on. You're getting disconnected, and he's like way connected into.
Pretty much. I often describe him as a control freak, whereas I'm kind of, prefer to sort of just have an overview and see what's going on, and help ideas develop. But yeah, he's really the minutia, and maybe I'm the bigger picture. So he effectively, when we're delivering things, kind of becomes my boss. He's telling me what to do, what he wants me to do next. And then in the beginning, I'm probably a bit more argumentative over, things I believe in. But, it works. We respect the process, and we don't question it, really.
It sounds like the perfect marriage, frankly. I mean, you've discovered the balance. You both know your strengths and weaknesses, and you don't overexploit each other.
No, exactly. There's a mutual respect for what we do and what we're good at. And it's definitely the longest relationship I've ever been in. So it's great. It works out well, and we're solid. And 15 years on, it's we've turned down jobs even that would split us up purely because we believe we're better as a package than individually.
Well, let's talk about reaching this pinnacle of BBC Creative, and after Big, you kept your trajectory in that direction. What happened next?
Well, after Big, we went to McCann, and we've worked in McCann offices kind of all over, really. We worked at Birmingham for a while. That was why we were really establishing ourselves. And then whilst in Birmingham, we had a brief stint at McCann Berlin. And then later we ended up joining McCann Manchester. And from McCann Manchester, we did a brief creative, our first kind of temporary creative director role at McCann Prague, which was really, really cool. So we got tons of experience from the big network agency, and it was great. I loved being there, but I think the desire to work with an agency that's perhaps a bit more edgy and not as risk averse as the big networks tend to be, because they're dealing with these sort of monster clients and these huge budgets. There's not a lot of risk taking, so we felt we were making maybe safer work than we were comfortable with. So we were looking for something else at McCann, and the BBC came knocking, and we did actually turn them down twice because we weren't sure. Joining BBC Creative at the time was a bit of a leap into the unknown. So For Creative has kind of been the pinnacle of in-house ad agencies, certainly in the UK, making sort of wonderful, edgy, provocative work for so long. We'd always dreamed of working there someday. So when, Justin Baramian called us and sold us BBC Creative, it's the BBC's version of Full Creative, we took that risk and, took a bit of a pay cut from where we were, and, I've never regretted that. It's been, the fulfillment of working at the agency you really want to work at, being as prolific as we've been able to be. It's been an absolute joy.
Well, the work shows. It looks like you are pretty unrestricted and have a lot of creative latitude, and are obviously working on projects that, promote you exercising, going as deep as you want to go to get to the stuff.
It's been so good. I mean, the BBC is public funded, so being in the public sector, there's a lot of red tape, and there's a lot of internal politics. The UK government kind of use the BBC like a bit of a football. There's a lot of people would like to sort of defund the BBC, as in not have it paid for by the public anymore. But at the same time, it's such a vital institution. It's part of everyone's life. In the UK, you cannot go a day without consuming the BBC in some way, whether that's listening to the radio or even checking the weather report tends to come from the BBC. And of course, it's a completely neutral political outlook. So it's so important for the way this society runs, for balance. I really fear a world without the BBC. You've got Fox and CNN or whatever, and you've got these sort of partisan sort of broadcasters. But the BBC, I believe is really impartial. So it's such a vital institution. Anyone who works at the BBC has to really believe in it. And then I suppose, we're given real license to push it. And through your creative career, you always do push things as far as they can go. But like I said, when we were at places like McCann, you'd have your kind of super out there idea, your good progressive idea, and your really safe idea. And I always felt that the really safe idea was the one that you'd end up making. At the BBC, we're probably at the other end of that, which is great, because doing stuff that is outside of the norm, that's unexpected, is a way to get noticed. And when in a world of Netflix and Disney Plus and Amazon Prime, the BBC is fighting for its life. It's kind of suddenly got new adversaries and new challenges and people consume media in a different way. We're not turning on the TV set at 7 p.m. and sitting down for the evening anymore just to watch whatever the BBC is showing.
Right.
The abundance of choice is quite a frightening place for the BBC, but also that makes the BBC in itself very exciting and prepared to do what it takes to challenge and be noticed.
You're listening to The Pure Now Show, a creative podcast for creatives presented by Balance. Well, and you can't be lazy in this environment because, there's a lot of garbage out there to watch, but if you really want to impact, you have to really work hard to create things that are going to gain people's attention because of the massive amounts of choices they have. And they are now the programmer. This is not, like you said, it's not a TV guide with 7, 8, 9 o'clock where your life is planned out for you. You get to choose whatever you want. And that makes it much more challenging for creative people to not take that easy route, like you said when you were at McCann, which I want to talk about, is working previously before you got this utopic type of situation, creative situation. I want to know some of your trials and tribulations of working at a typical agency and, how you were able to either fail or succeed depending on, what the client's needs were, how you were able to fulfill those needs. I mean, advertising has changed a bit since back in the day. I mean, it's basically the same, but now the parameters have changed and the target audiences have changed and the deliverables have changed. But, it's still kind of, come up with the greatest ideas and execute them in the most interesting way that, takes care of the client's needs and produces results.
Yeah.
How did you fare in your early years working in the agency world and learning through, successes and failures, how to be where you are now?
I suppose, it was there's nothing, Tim and I often talk about our portfolio, and our portfolio is pretty much made of the work we've done in the last 5 years at the BBC. It supersedes everything we've done before. I think we fared pretty well. I think Tim and I are pretty adaptable animals in terms of we did thrive within McCann. We progressed quickly. We studied our craft. I think we're very astute presenters. When we got to McCann Manchester, we very quickly became the pitch team where, rather than necessarily looking after certain accounts, we were constantly pitching because we were the team that knew how to win those pitches, which is great. But I suppose, in knowing how to win a pitch suggests that you are a bit of a political animal. In our job was to get things over the line, and that's what made us very popular at McCann. And also, there's so much value on just winning the business, I felt, rather than necessarily doing the work. It was about getting new clients on the balance sheet, really, which is fine, and then kind of keeping them as long as possible. But I kind of fell out of love with it when we were winning certain accounts, and then, as happens in agencies, the younger, less experienced people take on the day-to-day running of that, and I felt a little bit fraudulent that you'd spend months building these relationships and everything. And relationships is what is a key to good work. It's if you get on well with your marketing director colleague from your client, you're able to sort of develop a friendship and a trust. That's when you make good stuff. It's when they trust you, they believe in you. But my experience was we'd do that, and then we'd rarely ever see those clients again because we're off trying to win the next pitch. And then I suppose when you win the awards and you become more senior and you become a department head and a creative director, also the rate you're charged out at goes up ridiculously to a point where you're not allowed to. The agency can't afford for you to work on maybe the more interesting clients, which tend to be the ones that pay less. They're not the big sort of behemoth client. So suddenly the stuff where we knew there was opportunity for doing something really cool because they were a bit of a challenger brand was out of our reach, if we did it on the books, because my other half, Emma, was an account director at the time. She would say to me, I literally can't afford for you and Tim to work on this account. I don't have the budget, which seemed crazy in that, something's broken in the agency system. And this was 5 years ago, and I believe it's changing now. Those sort of pricing structures are really outdated. But yeah, that was tough. But yeah, like I say, we were obviously pretty good at sort of climbing, and eventually we were put on the board at McCann. So yeah, it was a fascinating time. It was a great time. I learned so much, but also didn't want to get caught up in the machine, which I think some creatives do, where you get so promoted and your salary becomes so inflated that you can't really leave, because to leave would be taking a substantial drop in the world to which you become very comfortable in. So I loved it, but also realised it probably wasn't for me. And that's not to say in 10 years' time I think, what I could really do with that security. But yeah, at the time I felt that, as we were Tim and I were in our mid-30s, now was the time we really needed to make our best work. And the gamble of the BBC, which it was a gamble, really paid off, and it's been a very good fit for us.
Well, let's talk about some of your projects back then, and they don't have to be by name, but I'm interested in maybe something you worked on that ended up being a total nightmare, and you delivered it, and you learned from it, but it was not a comfortable experience for you, and how you dealt with that.
Well, there's one actually. I won't name name. It was we won. First thing we did, Tim and I arrived at McCann, Manchester on a Monday morning. We're taken straight into HR with all the induction processes. Within 20 minutes, we were called out of that induction process, saying there was a opportunity brief that we need to get on this pitch. It was for a big furniture retailer. We worked on this pitch for a few months. And did something very radical within the space, because furniture retail is pictures of a sofa and a price, not particularly interesting. So we did a real sort of brand building piece, which was really exciting. The potential was to serialize what we were doing. So I don't know if you've ever heard of the Bisto family in the UK. It was it was an advertising campaign for Bisto gravy, or Oxo, sorry, not Bisto, Oxo cubes, which is a beef stock cube.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, so this family became an ongoing saga, and growing up, it was, okay, what's the new Oxo commercial? So we kind of came up with a similar thing for this furniture retailer, and it was all going very well. There was a few red flags, I guess, from the client in the pitch process. There was a history of changing agency once every 3 years. But obviously you're optimistic at the time, you think you're going to change this. So we made the work. We spent exorbitant amounts of money making the first commercials, which were essentially episodes, this campaign, and within a week of it running, it was pulled because their sales figures, they had dropped, because they were all about, here's a sofa, here's the price, buy this now, kind of companies that are always on the verge of bankruptcy. And we'd sold them the value of building a brand, and how it's a long-term project. Yeah, so that disappeared a couple of weeks from the pitch, or a couple of weeks after we'd won the pitch, we'd made the films. The entire campaign was chucked away, which was soul destroying at the time. Really, we kind of thought this would be a famous campaign, and I still believe it would be. To then suddenly having to oversee people making furniture commercials, which is, I need to show 6 sofas in 30 seconds, and you've got to say this was the price and this is now the price, and that was tough. It's difficult to work on stuff like that if you've got zero interest in what you're doing, because you essentially you're not to denigrate people who work in those places, but I might as well go and work in the furniture shop, because I'm doing the same job as a salesperson, where I'm just presenting a price and getting people to sign up.
Right.
They're kind of places that are always in sale. The sale never ends. So that was disappointing. But I suppose we learned. It gave us a lot of maturity, I suppose, in the end, that advertising and the creative industry isn't always a utopia where you're perhaps always right, or because obviously there was a factor of we weren't quite right, because we would have I'm not sure how long that would have taken to build that brand. So there's accepting that, learning to have other expertise as well is important, and accept that there's people that know better than you, I think has really been, it's quite an awakening. But yeah, that's the tough project that started off like it could have been a game changer, and crumbled very, very quickly. But yeah, you live and learn, and now I think, if I end up back in the commercial advertising world, we'll always avoid furniture retailers.
Well, let's talk about the opposite now. Let's talk about a project that surprisingly went really well, and also, a learning experience, but, you got to execute what you wanted. The client was happy, and it was a magnificent thrill for you to do whatever you did.
Well, again, we were working at an agency called Big, and they had Domino's Pizza in the UK, and we'd actually lost the account. Tim and I started working on the account when it was kind of on its way, and we'd been given the date, and in the budget, they had a small amount of money, maybe £5,000, and challenged us, can do something with that? You need to spend that. That's part of the budget. What can you do? So we were having a think, and it was around the time drones were becoming sort of mass market things, and so we were joking about how pizzas would one day be delivered by robots or drones.
I love that piece. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
So it's like it was the first time anyone had done a proof of concept video of a pizza being delivered by drones. Even though the video we made, there was no pizza in that box, because if you put pizza on, the drone couldn't lift at the time. It was quite basic. So we had very little money to hire a pretty crappy camera, a small amount of editing time. And we invented this thing called the Domicopter, which was Domino's first drone delivery. We create a proof of concept film, and then we put it out on April Fool's Day, and away we go. Ha ha, very funny. So we made this spoof film. I don't know what happened, but something went wrong in editing where we missed this April Fool's Day deadline, and it wasn't ready until like the end of May or June. Which actually turns out to be a complete blessing, because if you're doing something where you're trying to fool people or to send it viral to get it shared, doing it on April Fool's Day when everyone's doing it, exactly
cliche,
it would have been rubbish. So that was a blessing in disguise. So we sent it to Domino's, and they said, okay, we'll put it on our Facebook page in the UK. And we're like, okay, thinking that's a bit underwhelming, but fine. And we wrote the post and sent it to them. That was on Friday. I think we went to the pub, and then on Sunday night, having forgotten about it really, because it's not like an amazing film. It's like thoroughly okay, and we've kind of thought, well, that's that. We're not going to work on Domino's anymore. Got a call saying, I don't know if you know this, but you're on Jay Leno tonight. Jay's going to open the show with talking about this Domicopter. So we went online. The views of this film we'd made were then in the millions, and it was getting shared, and it gone crazy that people were so excited about this drone. They thought it was a real thing. And then Jay Leno opened with the show. Stephen Colbert did a piece on it. It was on one of the maybe NBC or something like that, did a piece, interviewed people in the street. They did Vox Pops on a morning show. Absolutely crazy. It went absolutely mad. From £5,000 and a thoroughly uninterested client and account team. It was Tim and I with a camera and a guy that could fly drones. Went out for a couple of hours and made a pretty average film, and went crazy. So that was the first time I think we tasted sort of super success. And obviously the awards followed, and it was kind of, I guess looking back, probably a bit of a game changer in our ambition. Certainly, I think we suddenly realised that we could do way more than was being asked of us.
And how fascinating is it that for £5,000 and a client that was at the back door with 1 foot out, and you had nothing to lose, they obviously had nothing to lose, and in the most simplified production manner, you created something that went nuts without all the bells and whistles. I mean, other than the drone and the pizza, which my friend who makes little airplanes wanted to make a pizza plane and deliver all over Vietnam. That whole simple concept, people literally ate it up, and probably would have been, pounding their phones to hit the app to get the drone to bring the pizza. Like right now, I can't even imagine the skies filled with pizza drones. but that's got to happen at some point.
Yeah,
I'm
it
sure.
was. Yeah, hopefully. Well, one danger is that having received that piece and the rotor blades in your face, you kind of someone's going to get seriously injured. But so it was flawed, I guess. Yeah, just crazy when there were no longer we were no longer being scrutinised. Domino's left anyway, but I suppose we made it awkward for them to leave in that they'd had in the UK they'd put this film out, and the UK film had gone, big in the US, and there was a big segment on TV in India. So it went really crazy. But yeah, it was super gratifying. Really felt like we took a step forward in our careers at that point.
So what happened after that? I mean, now you've experienced something completely by surprise. It's not like you were working hard on this campaign and had a certain level of expectations. You had zero expectations that this would do anything, but in fact, it had a lot of impact on you professionally. So how did you take that momentum and continue on with that?
I think it ignited a bit of a fire in terms of the work we did. I think from that point onwards, what we did was always ambitious, the stuff we really wanted to make, but I think it went more so. And I think we learned that there's a certain amount of, as a creative director, you can't just sit in an ivory tower and expect people to do things. Tim and I still very much get our hands dirty. We're happy to, we will sit, if a team's having a problem, we'll stay up till midnight writing stuff and throwing ideas together. Like I say, Tim especially happy to, sit with sound engineers and in grading sessions, or, working out how we get if we haven't got the budget to do something one way, let's look into stuff, how we can do it another way. So I suppose it's making sure, we're never compromised and we never kind of accept defeat first time round. There has to be another way. So I think it really helped our personalities and our approach to the work, which in creative terms, I think it's always, talent is brilliant, but talent only gets you so far. It's the willingness to go the extra mile and really push things, where, other teams who, other people who we see, to have perfectly good careers, but maybe never win the awards or never quite get the fame that, let's be honest, we're all driven by ego in this industry. We want our work to be seen, never quite get that. So we always work hard on, doing the extra stuff that, maybe it's other people are unwilling to do. And I think that's what Domicopter taught us. That was a real sort of do-it-yourself project, which we saw through with, just you've got a flash of hope that this might do something or be celebrated in some way. But yeah, it taught us about you've got to really drive yourself. There's a great saying which is in the story of your life, make sure you're the one holding the pen, not relying on other people.
Did you take that conceptual exercise and apply that in any other way afterwards that actually had some success and got some traction?
I think we've always tried to, we're told we have, say, billboards, for example. It's like, well, what can we do beyond making to an ordinary billboard? So something we did recently for an Our Planet series by the BBC was with David Attenborough, was to create a piece called the Burning Billboard. And so it's really helping the people that put that together work out what we can do feasibly, and it can't actually be on fire. Does copious amounts of steam look like smoke, and we get some orange light and things like that. So it's the Domicopter experience that drives things like that, the extra stuff. And even when we, for 2018, the World Cup in Russia, we made an ad out of embroidery. Every stop motion frame was a separate piece of embroidered material. And everyone says you're mad, you can do this by CGI, stop wasting time, and everything else. But it's doing that and making sure when, the people doing the embroidery, the embroidery company are kind of going, we don't want to do this anymore, making sure Tim and I are there to understand what their problem is. How can we smooth this for you? How can we make this easier? It's just not leaving that to other people. And there's a fine line in being, a control freak and being overbearing, but it's always knowing, being the master of the ship and knowing what bits are moving, where the problems are, and giving that your attention, not thinking, I'm a creative director, I'll send my producer to do that, or I send whoever to do that. It's taking responsibility, and I think that's really important.
You're listening to The Pure Now Show, a creative podcast for creatives presented by Balance. I think you've kind of passively given a lot of advice, and but I want to be more direct in my question about providing advice to, let's say, younger people coming up in the creative industry who have aspirations of becoming creative directors. It's obviously a much different world now than the world you started in, but those young people are starting in this world that's current and present. What advice do you have for people who are interested in creating TV commercials, in getting into the real visual industry and making impact through marketing and advertising? What's a good approach for them? Especially since there's so much competition now, and just the fact that there's millions of portfolios online. I mean, before everything was a physical, one-off, one-of-a-kind. I remember looking at hundreds of portfolios, but that was all of them. It wasn't millions, infinite numbers of them. How does someone differentiate themselves and create that opportunity for themselves?
I think, there's so many talented people, but I think the people that always catch my eye are the persistent ones, the ones that you can feel the hunger in terms of, I'm lucky enough to get many messages every day saying, can you give me a book crit? And to be honest, I get so many, I ignore most of them. Certain days I ignore all of them. But it's the names that keep popping up. They think, okay, he hasn't replied, I'm going to try again, or I'm going to try a different way. I'm lucky enough to have teams have accosted me in the street. They've waited outside the BBC. They've called me on the phone. They've just done different things, or they've done something that makes them stand out. If you're a creative and you've got your online portfolio and you think it's me in the portfolio, that's enough. It's often not, unless you are, lucky enough to get an interview. It's getting your foot in the door, and you've got to be creative in how you do that. And there are so many ways, but you can't sit on the sidelines and wait for someone's going to ask you to dance. You've kind of got to get up in their face, I think. Well, certainly that works on me. It's when someone is not annoying. I mean, sometimes people are so annoying, I think I've got to give you an interview because this effort you're going to is amazing. And it goes back to what I say about effort and your willingness to sort of push things. And I think people being persistent in contacting you or creating something to get your specific attention shows remarkable effort, and I'm impressed every single time. And I can almost guarantee that if you don't get a session with me, I'll certainly, the senior teams, I will delegate to them or to the creatives that run our placement program at the BBC. You'll certainly see them. But if your approach is to send a random email with your portfolio attached and then never follow it up, so does everyone else. Shock horror. There's like every creative director will be getting 10 of those a day.
Right. That's it? Only 10?
Well, I'm trying now. I'm not trying not to. I'm enjoying it, but yeah. So it's exactly. But I think also the 10 to me would be frightening. It's there's only maybe 30 creatives in our department. We're not desperate for talent. You've really got to force the issue.
Right. When you were talking about McCann, all I had I was having these flashbacks of the show Mad Men. I don't know why. Yeah. Were you a fan when it was around?
I absolutely loved Mad Men, and then died slightly when McCann awkwardly in New York put out some ads saying McCann is the most mentioned advertising agency in Mad Men, and then is it Matthew Weiner who wrote it got upset by this. So in one of the first episodes of season 2, they talk about I think it's Ken Cosgrove, the character's name. He goes to McCann and they say, what's McCann like? And he talks about he hasn't been amongst that many sort of crazy people since he went to work with his mother in a mental hospital in New York City. And so yeah, it's a bit cringeworthy, but there are people at McCann, or certainly were, who saw themselves as a latter-day Don Draper for sure, which was it's so dated now. That approach to the world it really doesn't exist like that, and I think for the good.
For sure. It's super fun to watch, though. What an amazing...
Yeah.
Because even as a kid, I dreamed of being a commercial artist, and I had these visions of, the pitching and just the cool thing of being on the pulse of everything that's happening for everything that's being sold, essentially.
Yeah, sure.
And that was the ultimate narrative for that entire beginning of what advertising looked like. So
yeah,
perfect.
For sure. Yeah.
All right, my closing question is, if you could not do what you're doing and you had to stop anything related to that, what would you want to be doing?
In terms of an alternative career?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I don't know. I find fulfillment always in being creative. So in music, being at home more often allows me to play my guitar much more often. I've reached an age where I've become quite interested in gardening and sort of, I love the outdoors, and to do I often look at the guys, mowing lawns and think, but with real pride and creating these wonderful sort of outdoor spaces. That fascinates me. So whatever it would certainly be creative and will probably be outdoors. I think I'd like to be outdoors a lot more. Becoming chained to a laptop and a desk becomes, after a while you realise that there's way more to life. And I think, certainly, I've had certain awakenings where it's maybe I've been too focused on the job we do, and it's defined me way too much. So yeah, just enjoying the things that I enjoy doing, and it's sometimes the mindless task of mowing a lawn, but certainly creating, something beautiful elsewhere.
James, it's been super fun to chat with you. Really appreciate you taking a trip down memory lane with me and sharing stories with me, and all the best to you.
Thank you so much. You too. Have a great evening, I'd imagine. But
we're at 3:03 p.m. here. You're just getting started.
Well, yeah. Enjoy your evening. Yeah, thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, sure, man. If you enjoyed the Pure Now show, you can check out more episodes at balancestudio.tv or anywhere fine podcasts are broadcast. Pure Now is produced and engineered by HaiHa Dang and directed by Dong Wun Guan. Thanks so much for watching.